folks, Bougainvilleas are one of those old school plants that many of us would love to have in our garden but are a bit too afraid to, because of the fact that we've been into gardens where we've seen Bougainvilleas climbing up trees that are 20 or 30 meters in height. And you thinking, if I'd have let one of these little guys loose up there, well then imagine having to take it out. And those of you who have had to have taken it out, it's cost you a whole lot of money. So let's get to the point. How do we treat Bougainvilleas? How do we make sure that they don't behave like triffids? And how do we get the most out of what we want from them? This Bougainvillea here is one of the most sought after. It's called Bougainvillea beryllemma, and that's because it is white. Now remember, with the color white, there are no shades of white, whereas there might be shades of mauve or shades of purple. This is exactly it. There's only one white, which is why everybody wants it. Now, as a grower, this plant is fantastic. But any plant that you don't keep checked and under control is going to go wild. And yes, if the Bougainvillea has the capacity to grow to 10 meters, and if you don't prune it, it's going to do exactly that. So this is why we need to make sure that we plant them in the right place and that we look after them. Behind me here is a standardized Bougainvillea. So you can see they've controlled the stem, and then literally the ball on top is where we have the flowers. Now, if you plant this in a pot or even in the garden, make sure it's got a good stake and just keep it pruned, you will always have it looking like this. However, if you left it in the garden and left it to its own devices, well, you came back or woke up a few years later, you're going to have a real problem on your hands. So I want to put this guy into a pot because beryllemma is great as a pot specimen. And I've got this plastic container. It's got some holes in it. And first of all, what I need to do is make sure that I get some drainage pebbles in the bottom of it. Right, next up, I want to put some potting soil into the container. Remember, we're only using potting soil. We're not using soil from the bottom of the garden. And in this case, because we're using potting soil, it has no weeds, it has the right aeration and the right consistency for good plant growth. At this point, I'm going to add in some bone meal, because remember, the bone meal is going to give the great root growth that we need for this plant. Now, when you're planting Bougainvilleas, and some of you might have had this happen to you in the past, that you've planted them and all of a sudden they've just literally popped their clogs. And the reason for that is the following. Because Bougainvilleas, as you can see by the stem, are only grown from hardwood cuttings. So it means that they've taken a large mature part of the stem of the mother plant and used that to propagate more, because that's the only part of the Bougainvillea that you can actually get cuttings from. And when you plant it, very often what happens is that you disturb the little roots coming off this main stem. If you snap those feeder roots, that's when the Bougainvillea sulks. Might be in its pot, it might die, and it might not flower for a good few years because it's been disturbed. So one of the tricks that I like using when you're planting Bougainvilleas is as following. And this will be the same as if you're planting it in a hole in the garden or in a pot. Put the Bougainvillea into your container or into the hole. Get a pair of scissors and now watch closely, because all you're going to do is make a few slits up the side of the bag. Actually, this is going to be the only plant that you're never going to take the bag off it when planting it. So let's just do that. Over here, now watch carefully what I'm doing. I'm just going to make a slit up the side, another slit there, and so I'm going to do it all the way around the planting bag. And that way, you can see the bag is literally just kind of hanging in there. There are areas right over here for where the roots can eventually make their way out. But I'm not disturbing all that soil around the base of the plant where all those good feeder roots are. So that's really important. If you do this with your Bougainvilleas, I promise you will never lose one as you're planting them. So now that I'm happy that that little guy is in place, all I do now is carry on filling up with the rest of the potting soil around it. Remember, the bag stays there. Yeah, you might think I've lost it a bit, but this is the right way to do it. Fill it up with your potting soil. There we go. Okay. I like using just an ordinary piece of wood. Take that and you can firm down the potting soil. You can also use the back of a trowel for this. It works incredibly well. But you can see, as I'm firming down the potting soil, you can see that we're needing much more. Because often what happens if you don't do this, that once you've watered, you actually expose a whole lot of the planting bag that you did use originally. And that's when the plant dries out and goes through stress. All right, that is looking great. Firm it down again. Right, and our last bit of soil in here, just to make sure that it really is going to be nice and snug. And folks, that's how you do it. Whenever you're planting a bougainvillea, remember, don't take the bag off the plant. In terms of pruning and maintenance, once it's finished flowering, all right, only when it's finished flowering, then do you prune it back. If you keep on pruning your bougainvillea into those awful balls that I often see in people's gardens, if you keep doing that, then you're never going to allow it to flower. So the general rule is, after flowering, that's when you give it a prune to encourage the new growth and then encourage the new set of flowers. If they're in a container, feed them with a high potassium fertilizer, such as 315 or 234. You want a big end number to be able to encourage good flowering. And that's all they need. Keep them in the bag, lots of sun, and you're good to go.